Hi there, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual tech meetup sponsored by LogRocket. We have with us today Dmitry Vinnik. Dmitry is an engineering manager with Meta. He specializes in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Dmitry has actually been a past guest on our PodRocket podcast series, and so we're just thrilled to have him back with us today to share his expertise. Today, he will be talking about optimizing application performance with React DevTools. So let me share my screen here for a moment. Are you able to, I'm having a bit of technical difficulties here. Are you able to, there we go. Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so Dmitry, as I said, will be talking about optimizing application performance with the React DevTools. This is a really important topic. We have several articles about React DevTools on our blog. They get thousands of page views every month, lots of questions. This is really a topic that people want to understand better and have lots of questions about. So we're very eager to get some more information about this today. Today's, let me move this down. Today's meetup is sponsored by LogRocket. So LogRocket quite simply builds better digital experiences. It does that in several ways. It solves user-reported issues. It fixes issues faster, and it also prioritizes issues so that your team, knows better which issues are the most important to address and can work more efficiently. Okay, and so that's really it for me for today. This meetup will be recorded. We will be sending out the recording afterwards. Please use the Q&A if you have any questions. We may hold them until the end if Dmitry is sort of in the middle of explaining something, or depending on the context, I may interrupt him as well and ask a question, but we'll try to get them all addressed, okay? Thank you, and that's it for me, Dmitry.
Thank you, and yeah, hello everyone. As been mentioned, my name is Dmitry, and I'm an engineer manager. I currently support developer advocacy for AI, ML, and big data. And I'm sure you've heard of those projects that we advocate for. But, this meetup is really focusing on React and optimizing its performance. You can also watch some of our content on Meta open source YouTube channel, where we actually previously covered topics like React, React DevTools that we'll work with today, and a couple other topics that I think you might find interesting. But let me start sharing my screen. Today will be a combination of sharing my slides, actually coding, going through the tools. At the end, we'll also look at some commercial offerings. Again, we're sponsored by LogRocket today, so we'll look at LogRocket as one of the commercial ways to measure your performance, and then use those learnings to enhance your application. But more importantly, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And with that, let me share my screen. Okay. All righty. You probably see a galaxy right now. Okay, good. And my desktop is a little bit cleaner because I usually drop everything into a new folder, and I have a new folder of new folders. Let me now find the slide. Okay, here's the slideshow. Okay, this very long title. And let me make sure you actually can see me. I guess let me see. Thank you. Yes, you can see my screen. I can see it in there. All right. So by the way, on the left bottom corner, you can see my Twitter handle, I think it's called. You can find all the content that I do, but also you can learn about Meta open source a bit more if you go to my Twitter account, and I'll also be sharing the slides and whatever else I can share on my Twitter account. But let me go right into it. So again, we'll focus on trying to figure out how to, measure your performance of your React apps and how to improve them. Okay, see, I already made a mistake. Okay, cool. So let's start from the beginning. And the question is really, what is React? And with that, let me, again, go out of my slides and actually show you something that you might have not seen. We recently launched, at the open source in our contributor community, launched the React React.dev, which is a brand new way to learn React and work with React. It's really enhancing the experience of those who haven't worked with React, because now you really go through quick start and step-by-step instructions on how to start working with it. It highlights what you will learn, deep dives. It's completely different experience from what you might have seen before. And again, I highly encourage folks to take a look at that. We also published a blog post about it. And yeah, go to react.dev to learn more. But to my question, what is React? You can see right from here, from the top, it's a library for web and native user interfaces. It's an entire ecosystem, whether it's React or React Native. Again, in this brand new website that we just launched, you can see a couple of great examples how to use React. But really, this meetup is not what is React. We assume that you know, or at least you work with React in the past. And ultimately, we'll rely on components and how they rendered for this meetup. But again, I encourage everybody to go to react.dev to learn more. Okay, let's now go to the next slide. So now we have the library, have the React with us. What do we do now? And with that, let's actually see it in practice, because what's better way to do a meetup than to do some coding? And again, I'm going out of my slides, and I hope I'm not switching slides too quickly. I'll actually try to slow down a little bit. When you're nervous, you talk too fast, and when you do virtual meetups, you're more nervous than in person. Okay, so again, if you go to React website, you'll find Start a New React Project page. And it actually walks you through a couple of solutions. You might have heard of a project, Create React App, but also there are other offerings and other recommendations that we give people how to start working with React. And one of them right on top is using Next.js, which is yet another framework to have a full stack React. It's great for folks who just starting out, because some of the complicated things like routing and dealing with data is handled for you out of the box. And that's one of the suggestions that we give to people, how to get started with React. So I go to this web page, I copy this terminal command, I go to my terminal. And where's my terminal? It is right here. So I put it in the terminal, I press enter, and it will, ask me what you want to call it. Let's call it my app. Let's just say yes to everything. I actually want to have TypeScript, ESLint. Anyways, you can just say yes to everything. It will kickstart the process of downloading and building the app for you. We're not going to wait for it, but I'm just showing you that to get started with React, it's fairly quick. I already have my app, so I open my VS Code. So it's right here. With that, you can see in fairly standard React app, but without, again, going into the details of how the React is structured, let's actually build it. If you go to your package.json, you'll see a couple of scripts. We will start with the dev, basically running our application, our React app in the dev mode. Okay. So it will basically start me a new app under the 3000 port. This is okay, good. Anyways, let's open up the screen. So you can see I have an app running. That is fantastic. Let me actually unpin it. Okay, so we have an app running in a dev mode, and I'll explain why it matters later on. So with that, actually, let's go back to our slides. And of course, coding is fun. That's why it's extremely fun. I get a lot of pleasure out of coding. It's how I see it is basically you're able to create so much out of pure nothingness, right? You can type a couple lines of code, program works and does work that would have taken you forever, or you might not even had a job in the first place if not for coding. So I love it immensely. But really, code is a living, breathing thing, not in a real sense, but in the sense that there is a life cycle. Great guys, great people at Snook. It's this amazing startup, a security startup. They made this great graph that I actually like for describing this life cycle. Basically, when we work with an app, when we build an application of any kind, any software, you go through steps. Maybe first will be gathering the requirements, analyzing them, designing an app, then developing an app. Of course, you should not be forgetting about testing. And by the way, for testing, you can find other great open source projects like Jest when it comes to React. Then we deploy it, of course, and we maintain. Because again, things that we create require maintenance. Otherwise, they basically die, and ultimately you have to unwind them and sunset them. But what do we do most with this life cycle? if you were to guess, or at least, all from the experience, you would know that it's actually maintenance. We do spend quite a bit of time on development, but ultimately it's the maintenance. It's you getting the bug. It's the app failing. It's not when. It's not if it fails. It's actually when it fails. So you need to make sure you're able to fix it. Even with tests, the more app is being regressed, meaning you make unintentional breakages to your app. Let's say you implemented the mobile functionality, so your app is visible on the mobile phone, and now your navigation menu breaks in the way it's displayed to the user. It's a regression. You did not intend to break the navigation menu, and you have to go and maintain your app. You have to update it. You have to update your test suite. You have to, again, make changes to the app. And all this maintenance is very costly. It takes a lot of time. So why does it take a lot of time? As I said, things happen. And these things can be, regular bugs, things that happen, or things that just went through some of the requirements that in the past were requirements or assumptions might actually have resulted in a bug. Or this common phrase, it's not a bug, it's a feature, maybe it actually was a bug. So these things require maintenance and changes. Regressions, again, something that I just mentioned, right? It's unintentionally you making a small CSS change, and then it basically pushes, profile image off the screen. That's definitely a thing you have to deal with. Performance issues, right? And we'll talk about it in a second. And many, many other problems. Today, we'll focus on the performance issues because, every other, area that I just mentioned would require its own meetup, or actually there are many books written on each of these sections, bugs, regressions, and more. So let's look at the performance issues. Most common that some of the end users often notice is a slow page load time, right? You go to a website, it takes a while to load, users unhappy, your customers basically unhappy, your app does not generate the money, it doesn't have an impact that you wanted. It can be overall leading to poor user experience. It might not be the page loading not fast enough, but it might be individual components. Let's say your navigation menu or a list of items, a number of products you have. They're not loading fast enough, or they're loading for so long that they're actually not appearing slowly. They appear all at once, which takes the page just hang. In the past, right, the users, way before 2023, users might have seen apps, native apps, not just mobile web apps, but some native apps where while the app is loading, you're not able to quit the app. That's not an experience people will be dealing with today. They will just abandon your app altogether. They will not go to your website at all. So poor user experience, poor UX is definitely one of the performance issues we try to target and avoid. Security problems, right? Let's say someone is attacking your website. You have a DDoS attack, multiple requests that are aiming to have a degradation of your service, meaning your service, your app, your website just doesn't work, can't handle that many requests. And this would ultimately be considered performance issue as well as other issues. And of course, ultimately it can be server overload. Maybe you're not partitioning your, audience by geolocation. You just go all through the same server. You're not you're not trying to remove the latency by locating your data centers close enough to your user. Anyways, ultimately, it's all the performance issues, kind of a brief description of what they can be. There are, of course, a lot more performance issues you can think of. So how will we cover these performance concerns? How will we actually deal with them? We will be focusing on them via something that's called React DevTools. It's one of the great additions, open source addition to the React ecosystem that's been around for quite a few years. If I remember correctly, I think the first blog post about it was in 2012 or maybe 2015. I know the profiler was added in 2018. So the community been evolving around the DevTools for React DevTools, and we'll look at that today. So let's take a look. So what is React DevTools? If you were to search for them, you would find this plugin. You can see it has lots of users over the years. So if you were to install it, it will be a plugin that I already have installed. And let me pin it. So, for example, if I go to Google, let me actually go to Google. Let's search for something. You can see it's gray, right? Gray meaning the app doesn't use the React. That's like very first use case for this DevTools. If I go to, for example, to LogRocket documentation, right? It does use the React and actually highlights it using the production build of React. That is important for us, and I'll show you in a moment. That app which is built, right? The very basic app with create React app or create next app. Since I used yarn dev, I'm running it in the dev mode, and you can see it's actually in the red mode. I mean, it has a red icon. And it's important as well, especially in the conversation around performance, because one of the great improvements, optimizations, is using production rather than using the dev mode. I've seen in the past, at least I've heard of a couple companies that would try to use the dev mode even for the production app, just because it allows them to have more insight and metrics and debugging. But ultimately, it's not feasible in the long run, because only the production will be optimized enough to provide your users best user experience. And this kind of a simple coloring system will help you to see which one you're working with. But anyways, for the sake of this presentation, let's assume, or at least let's start working with the dev mode. What does React DevTools do for us? Let's go to more tools. Let's go to developer tools. Right here, you can see our common. Elements, console, sources, etc., etc. Let's go here. Let's see more, and you can see two new things. It's a components and profiler. Let's look at the components first. Let me just do something really, really quickly. Good. So this is the default setup. Basically, it shows you your components on a web page, right? On your app, you can hover over them. They get highlighted. You can take a look and see all the properties. If you have any hooks, which is beyond the scope of this presentation of this meetup, but you will also have insight into that. You can either change them right here and see how that affects your UI. You can potentially navigate right into the DOM and see how this component looks like in the DOM, and it will bring you right here if you wanted to make even more changes. If you're dealing with suspense, which is again a bit more complex concept, you can also use it right here. But really, this is a very basic but good insight. One thing I'll mention with this basic app, you can see even if I hover over all the way down here, right? See how it gets highlighted on the left? It doesn't actually highlight this section, this very basic kind of a nav menu footer at the bottom to link us to particular, in this case, documentation of some sort. While if you go to our app, it's actually quite extensive, right? It has links, it has names of that, go to deploy, go to learn more, and so on and so forth. In order to see it right here, what you can do is you go to settings, and you have this default filter that you might have seen. I just added back. Ultimately, it's what you get out of the box, and it's just hides it because it's additional noise. It's not generated by our components, just pure DOM nodes in that sense. So if I were to delete it, I'll be able to see those bottom components as well. So nothing special. And of course, similarly to other things you might have seen, you can rename it. You can say something. Hello all. Obviously, nothing groundbreaking here. You can see how it changes right here in the UI. So again, gives you right access to the components and gives you a bit more insight. Component tree, again, great tool, but that's where we started with React DevTools. Another great addition to this tool, debugging tool, was a profiler. And you can really only use it properly on the dev mode. In production, let's say we go back to the production, and I was to try to see, go to component. Components, of course, are hidden for us for the most part because it's a production build. You can't really see the source when it's in production mode. But in a profiler, it will tell you right away. You can really only use it in dev mode or in a special like profiling build of React 16.5 plus. But really, the only place we would use a profiler is for our development stage or debugging stage with the dev mode right here. So let's actually start using it. First, what we'll need to do, we'll start the profiling. Have to press record. And for us, let's refresh because it's a very basic app. We'll look at other apps, more complex apps, and see how it works. This is just very brief demonstration. So I restarted. You might have not seen, but it did reload the page. Let's stop profiling. And this is the graph you get. Might seem a bit overwhelming at first, but really it's not that complicated. What it does, it divides your app load in commits, or basically stages of rendering, right, which you can switch between. Coloring is very important. Gray means on that stage of the commit, it did not render. So all these gray elements, they were rendered in the very beginning of loading your app. Colors mean quite a lot as well. This flame chart is not the best place to explain it, but if you go here in this ranked chart, it's ranking them by how much time it took to load them, right? Basically, this more orangey color would be referring to something that takes the most to load, right? And you can see it took like 1.2 milliseconds. It's ahead, and of course, these items would take the longest. And the Vercel logo, which is IO operation, actually getting the logo from our resources folder, of course, takes the longest. And you have some individual elements that take very little time and almost no time for like some additional providers. So that's really what it is. You can also see how it all looks on the timeline along the one straight line. So nothing too complex in here either. But that's really basic application of that. So let's take a look a bit closer. Let's look at something more complex. And for that, I can't avoid covering something that my great colleagues at Meta Open Source, along with the React dev team and React community, put together. And it's this tutorial, tic-tac-toe tutorial, that you can again find on react.dev to use as your starting point and to learn more. So this tutorial basically goes through the steps on actually building a very basic tic-tac-toe to give you to show you how it looks at the end. Let me scroll to the very bottom, because we're not going to build it. But at the very bottom, you would see how it looks in the end state, right? You can play tic-tac-toe with yourself and you can see the winner is X, right? So, and it also lists the steps so you can go back, and it basically allows you to go back in the past or switch between the stages. So ultimately, it gives you quite an insight on how to build with React, with the modern React. So this is really the tutorial we'll use to highlight how to use both React DevTools in a more complex way, but also how to use commercial use cases like LogRocket. So what we can do, rather than me going and forking the source code on GitHub and then building it locally, I will use Code Sandbox, which I really like to use for demos and things alike. So this is what I've just done. I basically pressed fork. It spinned off this temporary, but great place for me to work with my app. So it basically has a code and it's running it. I can open it in responsive, in a mobile app, for example, or I can open it in a new window. So if I were to, let's make it a bit larger, and you can see it's still running it in dev mode, even though it's running it on a Code Sandbox. If I were to open my developer tools, go into components, again, if you remember, and you can see right here still, it's dev mode, so I have an insight what these components are. If I were to, let's say, make a change, you can see the children changed, or I can manually change it here to O, so XO. So this is really the app, right? And going back and nothing complicated still, but at least it has more actions than that, than just our basic static React app that we just saw a few minutes ago. Okay, this is the component tab. Nothing to see here really, but the profiler is interesting because I really want to show you how to improve performance of something like this. So let's start the profiling. Let's reload, right? Let's press a couple things. Okay, and now let's stop the recording. So you can see you have, first of all, you can notice 7 steps. If you count, 6 of these squares I pressed, 6 plus initial load will end up being 7 commits, 7 steps that we basically recorded. And it has it by, step by step explaining what loaded throughout that process. We can see what loaded the most, right? Initially, of course, is the top, the entire game, and then individual squares. So the important thing I want to mention and show you, you can see how long squares take, right? It's, if you were to look, it's like 0.2. It will have to load each individual square. And really, it's not extremely complicated, and it's not very heavy, right? It didn't take that long. But imagine you have multiple concurrent users. You have people from different geolocations using the same app. So even these 0.2 milliseconds that can become seconds or minutes even, which is unacceptable, of course. And to improve that performance, I'll do something that, again, with an app like this, you generally wouldn't do, but to demonstrate you the most basic way to optimize your app, I would use memoization. Might sound like I mispronounce things. It's not memorization, it's memoization. And as was highlighted earlier, there is great blog on the LogRocket.com. And one of those blogs was written a while ago, actually not a while ago, fairly recently, but about optimizing performance in React app. And if you want to learn more, a bit more, case-by-case basis, this blog post covers memoization, right? This React.memo. In very basic terms, what it is basically caching things. I'm oversimplifying, and I can already hear people screaming and saying, this is not just that. In very basic terms, this is what it is, right? Instead of you re-rendering this app from scratch, you rendered it and then you pull from cache to then just reuse it for other purposes. So instead of me creating this button, you may change the, the initial square is really empty, right? What's the point of recreating it from scratch every time? You can pull it from cache. So let me create something here. So for that, what we will do, let me export const, let's call it memoized. I think that's the memoized square, if I able to type correctly. And that's just going to be square. Nothing complicated. Okay, so this does nothing. This is just one function means another function, nothing else. I just renamed it, right? So what I'll do is I'll replace all my square with memoized square. And now I would go and I need to save it, of course. Okay, I saved it. I'm used to my IDEs auto-saving things for me. That's why I often forget to do that. But of course, if you were to check your profiler, see it had to rebuild. If you were to check your profiler and to reload, nothing changed, of course. Because, you didn't do anything, right? It's still just having your, see, they still take 0.1, nothing to see here. But let's actually make it so it memoizes things. And to do it in React, it's fairly basic. The only thing you need to do is wrap it into what's called a memo. Okay, and now, and I also need to, of course, do a couple things. I need to import React from React. Okay, and now let's save it. And now I have that. And again, that blog post I just mentioned, we'll link it as well. You can see it a bit more. And of course, I didn't have to have a separate import statement. I could have just used it here. But for readability, I actually want to explicitly call it out here. So now, since I already replaced just rendering of the square, where is it? Yeah, since I already used change it to memoized square, it will automatically use that. Let's now reload it. Okay, why is it not reloading? Let's reload the whole thing. Good. Now let's go back. Okay, let's go to profiler. Let's start recording and let's play a bit. Okay, and let's stop recording. Okay, it might. Okay. You can see that it got a bit faster. I mean, what we were working with, it was like 0.2 versus now is like 0.1. Not much has changed. But again, when you scale your app, you have multiple concurrent users. You have people accessing this app from multiple locations. It does make a huge difference. So this is a very basic way to fix it. Two more things I want to mention for us. It's the commercial offerings or other ways to use to try to measure performance, right? With LogRocket, I'll show you how to do it in a very basic term, but in particular for performance, which I'm not going to dive into too much. You can either with React measure time between events, right? You can see the initial load complete and just measure how it's done. You can go into API monitoring with the particular API is being called. That one is not React specific, really. It can be done for any types of APIs. Or if you're familiar with Google Lighthouse, the metrics to measure performance your website, you can also use LogRocket to alert you if anything were to happen with your website, some degradation in terms of how Google perceives its optimization, right? How fast certain things load. In this case, how fast the DOM loading time is, or SEO, things like that. You can use the LogRocket for that. But if I wanted to just do basic integration with LogRocket, what I would do, right? I would go to Quick Start, right? And in the Quick Start, you need to find just these two commands. You will have to add an import statement. Okay. And you would also need to update your package. Okay, it's, if I remember correctly, let me copy it from my thing. I think I had it somewhere. Where did I have it? LogRocket. Actually, don't remember where I had it. Oh, interesting. Oh, here it is. Good, good. I have it here. So if I have LogRocket, this one is a general LogRocket thing. If I were to do 3.1, let's say, I can't even do packages anymore. Okay, and I were to save all of that. You need to replace this with your app ID. I have already things set up in here. I can just copy it from here, right? My test project name and my app ID. And I go here. Now I want to replace it. I want to save it and run my app in a different browser. I'm able to see, ultimately the performance. I go to my LogRocket again. I had already a session recorded before. Let me remove this one. Okay, let's go to this guy. Let's watch. So apart from performance measurement, what I like about this thing in particular is that it's actually best for me personally to measure things that outside of just performance. It's actually measuring your users' behavior and how they operate with your app, right? What they click, the heat maps, things of that nature. You can look at the performance because this is such a basic app. You won't see much in here, but you can enhance it with the things I mentioned, like event, time between events, or Lighthouse metrics, or your API usage. You can also enhance it with that. If you want to make it a bit more complex, you can also have a React plugin that's for the for this meetup in particular, not going to make big of a change, but that one is you want to click, you want to track a specific user clicks for particular components. You can do that with this React plugin. But that's what I wanted to talk about. And my call to action is really try to collect data in terms of performance data, right? When you're debugging or you try to measure degradations of your service, collect that data and make sure that's actually actionable. You're not just collecting for the sake of it. And so you collect and you act on it. Experiment with things, right? I've seen, and it always is one of the most, I wouldn't say just entertaining, but educational as well. It's the videos online where people, I'm a consultant. I was asked to improve the performance of an app, and they just go in and they make a small change, right? They use a minifier of some sorts, or they make sure that actually production built, or they use memo correctly, not just the way I just showed you here, but they use it in the proper places. But don't over optimize either, right? Sometimes, they say early optimization is really not the way to go. So keep that in mind, but experiment with things. And this is an open source, community, the React ecosystem. Make sure you contribute back and become a part of it. It's a very vibrant community. People, there are many events you can go to engage with people online or in person. So that's really my call to action here. And if you want to learn more from me about me, and as you can see, my camera went out. If you can see more from me and about me, go to my, Twitter, my blog, LinkedIn, email me if you have any direct questions. With that, I will stop sharing and we'll go into the exciting Q&A mode.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. I loved your description also about coding as you're creating something out of nothing. That's a very nice description. We have a couple of questions here from attendees. One person is asking, the company they work for uses a version of React before React 16.5, and they're asking if they're able to can they download an older profile in order to utilize the profiler dev tool?
You can use the React DevTools profiler with the dev in dev mode, even if it's even with
an older version.
Yeah. You can do it fairly easily.
Okay.
So, but you can also attempt to locally upgrade it, but I wouldn't recommend, because that really makes it so it's not clear experiment. It's not clear measurement, because then your production is very different from what you do locally. But yeah, you can give it a try. If it doesn't work, you can ask the community either in the chat. There is a Reactive Flux where it's like a Discord for React ecosystem. You can ask that question, or you can go to just search for it. You'll find other people facing the same exact questions. React. What I like about React a lot is most of the things you encounter, someone will have encountered already, so you can always ask those follow-up questions.
Great. Okay, thank you. We have another question asking, can you talk about the trade-offs of memonization? Should every component be memonized, or what is the best way to determine when not to memonize? Tricky word.
Yeah, memoization. Yeah, I know. It's with cache in general. It's how you evict cache. You don't want to just overblown that either, and you don't want to memorize everything. Some of the things just don't, not worth it if you use it only once, right? For example, and you load it once and no other part of your app is using it. That really makes sense for doing it. Like memoizing every single function, every single component, you're just gonna overblown it. It doesn't make any sense. Because it also adds to the complexity of maintenance, right? Of debugging too, because now you have yet another step of it being pulled from that. And it definitely adds to the complexity of your application. When to use it? Again, if it's a fairly basic function, but it's actually costly to load, and really you just maybe substitute, maybe the outer shell of it stays the same, but the properties, right, the values change. Like, let's say you have a list of profiles, right? Having that list rebuilt from scratch every time, right? It's costly, but it doesn't worth it. But because ultimately the only thing you change about those, generally speaking, of course, it can be different. If it's different layout, it's of course a different conversation. But if it's like the same layout, the most basic use cases, the only thing you replace is the source for an image, for the profile image, the description of a person, name and last name, right? So you just replace those properties, but the outer shell, the layout, the component overall stays the same. So that's a maybe perfect candidate for the memoization. But more importantly, measure it first. Measure it with the React DevTools, for example, with the profiler, to see that's actually the place you should focus on doing. Because if it's really like over optimizing is also a curse. You don't want to do that either. So keep that in mind. Collect data basically and act only on things that are indeed the problem, bottlenecks. And yeah, that will help you moving forward.
No, thank you. That is good information. And speaking of the risk of over optimizing, I was curious, in your own practice, as you're optimizing an app for performance, how do you you're integrating debugging into your workflow? Do you use multiple tools, or will you generally just use one tool at a time?
It's best to be, it's the right tool for the right problem. You don't want to be, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You don't want to have that approach. But again, if it's for debugging, I'm fairly happy with React DevTools, like for performance, right? But if it for the very basic use cases, but when it comes to, like as I mentioned, let's say I do want to know more about, but like let's say I'm doing focus group, right? And I'm trying to do A/B testing of some sort, how my app looks like with like navigation menu on the right or navigation menu on the left, and I want to present it to my to the audience, the limited audience. I would use some A/B platforms, right, that measure that experiment, as they would call it, or like in case of LogRocket, right, I would what I really enjoyed the most is really that the user behavior measurement, the heat maps, seeing where they actually spend most of their time, where the mouse is hovered over. So that's the problem I would try to solve with tools like that. Whereas just me debugging an issue, at least try to find the root cause of an issue and seeing if my solution worked. Most basic it is, like the React DevTools, the better it is. That's what I like. But becoming an expert in a particular tool also helps immensely. Knowing those the hotkeys, right, shortcuts, that really is useful.
Okay, good. And we have another question. It's actually related to Code Sandbox, but other people may have the same question too. That's usually how it is with questions. And I think I've actually seen this before. This attendee has had an issue where it says Code Sandbox is out of limit. What is the solution? Is that just like the file's too big, or have you seen that before?
Oh, I wonder, when you say out of limits, is it the number of anonymous boxes you created, or is it the individual box that's got too big?
It sounds like it might be an error when they go to it, like they're not able to use it. It is out of scope of this.
Yeah, I've not seen it, but it's I haven't seen it really. But to be honest, Code Sandbox and many other tools, it's been such a help to the community, right? There are lots of support for open source. That's why like open source documentation like React does have a direct link to it. And some of the playgrounds I've seen among web would be using something like Code Sandbox or other solutions. We all kind of play nicely with each other. And I'd say if you have that question, ask it in the React related Slack channels. You can ask the Sandbox people directly. They, on Twitter or other places, they're very active, as I said. And it would be interesting because some platforms do have limitations. I have not encountered it, even for free solutions, right, with the open source. But if you do, usually if you have a question, right, or you have an issue, you're not the only one who's facing it. So share it, and that's really the core idea of open source.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Well, this has been really just wonderful information. And Dimitri, as I said before, we always appreciate your expertise, and it's always lovely to see you. Thank you so much. And everyone who attended, thank you as well. If you have suggestions for other things you'd like to see, please let us know. This has been recorded. We'll be sending it out probably tomorrow. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Goodbye, everybody.
Appreciate it. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.